to our first Community Connects event for the 74th season. For those of you that don't know, we have the great opportunity to have Gregorio Luke with us today. Oh, that's loud. He's actually done this exact lecture that you're about to see over 8,000 times in Mexico City. So we're so excited to have him here and get some information about Man of La Mancha before our production opens this weekend. How many of you have your tickets already? Amazing! Woo! Well, thank you all for making that happen. We're so excited to see you all at the theater. If you don't have your tickets yet, tickets will be available afterward outside with Tad and Andrea. But without further ado, I would like to introduce to you your lecturer today, Gregorio Luke.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much. Before I begin, I would like to say that I've been wanting to do this presentation for more than 20 years. When I was the MoLAA director, I always saw Musical Theater West and Paul do all these productions, but there was very little opportunity because at the time I only did Latin American art. And I was a director of a museum of Latin American art. But I have this poster of the Man of La Mancha, but it's not recent. This must be 20 years old. And that's how long I've been wanting to do this. And then I'll explain all this in the lecture, but in a move inspired by Don Quixote, I decided to become a knight errant, in my case, giving lectures and being ready to starve. And so I quit my position as director. I quit everything to go on adventure. And so now that I did not have any constraints, I could lecture on whatever I want. And so in the past 20 years, I've diversified. And so in addition to my standard lectures on Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, I have gone heavily into European art, and I have done Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and Rembrandt and Don Quixote. And so when I saw that Musical Theater West was performing Man of La Mancha, I called Paul and I said, Paul, this is a lecture I've been wanting to do for many, many years. Let's do Don Quixote and Cervantes so that people can understand the Man of La Mancha. Because the problem of the Man of La Mancha is that unless you've read Don Quixote and you know it well, you enjoy the Impossible Dream and the songs, but a lot of people just get out there, like we say in Mexico, con cara de what? What happened? And I don't blame them. The Man of La Mancha, one of the great musicals, a piece that was first premiered in 1965. So it's a modern classic. And it's one of the very few musicals that has standalone hits that have endured the pass of time, like Impossible Dream, among others. And so the story of the Man of La Mancha is a fusion between the life of Cervantes, the author, and the life of his creation, Don Quixote. So he's imprisoned by the Inquisition, and I'll tell you why. And then in prison, so the first scene in the musical, you see them taking him to this jail, and there they put him on trial, his fellow prisoners, and he has to explain his life. And so then he goes into passages of Don Quixote and parts of this character. And so we see a blending of the author and his character, right? So hopefully this lecture will give you clarity on both and will allow you to enjoy this production. It starts Saturday, February 13th. Oh, well, Friday the 13th, and then it goes until March 1st. So it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it's really, really good. The the role of Cervantes, Don Quixote, will be played by this long-standing performer, Richard Bermudez, who has done a lot of plays here, and it's very exciting. So that is why I'm here, and I want to share something that I've, you know, that is my favorite book, and a book that I've grown up with, and that I think that a lot of people mention and quote, but few have actually read. So the idea is to tell you what it is about and to hopefully make you able to enjoy the play better. You can buy tickets, by the way, they're selling out like pancakes. And right outside here in the church, you can buy tickets if you don't have them already, either for the premiere or any of the dates of the season. So it's always good to see the Man of La Mancha. Well, Dostoevsky, the great Russian writer, once wrote, said, if this world ends and someone asks, what was life on earth? It would be enough to present a copy of Don Quixote. You imagine? For the great American filmmaker Martin Scorsese, he says, I discovered that anything I want to do stylistically, time, alterations, comic relief, Cervantes did it 500 years ago. He's been painted by Picasso, by Dali, by every great artist. He is also a subject of contemporary concern. People think of Don Quixote. And it is the most read book in history after the Bible. This is the original Spanish version. There's, of course, many excellent English versions, but it is a book that has been translated to all languages. Even the most remote and different, they all have Don Quixote. In film, of the Man of La Mancha, there is an excellent version with Peter O'Toole and Sophia Loren. And then in this presentation, I quote some movies, I use some scenes, and I use 3 movies. There's many more, there's recent ones, one of Fernando Rey, but the one that is considered one of the best is the Russian Don Quixote. So here you have it as Grigory Kozintsev. If he's called Grigory, it has to be good. And then there is a great English Don Quixote that has John Lithgow, and in the role of Sancho, excellent Bob Hoskins, that later would become a star. This was like a breakout role for him. And one of the best is a movie that was never finished, that was an obsession of Orson Welles. He worked and he worked, and unfortunately, the movie never concluded it, but I have some scenes that I'm going to be able to share with you of the Don Quixote of Orson Welles. In music and dance, there's the Manuel de Falla composition. There's a famous classical ballet by Petipa. But a modern ballet that I find extraordinary is George Balanchine. George Balanchine, the great choreographer of the 20th century. When he was old, he fell madly in love with a great ballerina called Suzanne Farrell. And he did a whole production of Don Quixote just to be able to play the part of Don Quixote uh, next to Suzanne. You know, Suzanne was famous. My mother is a dancer, so I know all about it. Most ballet dancers, because of the reality of ballet, become very hard in their muscles. But Suzanne somehow maintained the softness of her body. And then on top of that, she had all these southern manners. And she could get away with everything. She could bring a priest to give her benedictions in the wings, anything she wanted. She was, for many years, she was the queen of the New York City Ballet. But in all my lectures, I always ask the question, what's in it for you? What's in it for me? What can I learn about this book and how can it help me in my life? And if I cannot answer that question, I don't give the lecture. Because the goal is not to display my erudition. My role is to give you something that is entertaining but that is useful. And I think that one of the reasons that Don Quixote has endured so many years is that more than any other book, the book is about reinvention. Reinvention. Let's face it, most of our lives happen by accident. You study something when you're in your 20s, you're not that sure, you just kind of go in there, and then you graduate and you get a job, and one job bumps you to another one and another one. And soon you're 50 and you're stuck in a life that you never thought you would have or are particularly interested in, and yet you're stuck and you have obligations and kids in college, and you know? And this is exactly what happens to Don Quixote. Don Quixote is a man in his 50s that in that time was like the equivalent of 60s or 70s here. And he has a comfortable life. He's got a small property, he has a maid, he lives with his nephew, he's a friend with the priest and the barber. You know, he reads a lot. But what? Right? What? Why? What is the purpose of all this? And so one good day, he decides that he wants to be a knight errant. He doesn't have anything to be a knight errant. He's not young, he's not handsome, he doesn't have a powerful horse, he's not an aristocrat, he doesn't have any magical powers. He's just an old guy that wants to be a knight. And that changes him and changes the world around him. And this is much more than a novel. It affects people's lives. And I want to give you an example of how it can change you. And I'll use my own family because it's what I know the most, right? So it can be read in many ways. Don Quixote is also a book of wisdom. It has all the Aristotelian knowledge, but also all the popular knowledge. No, it's a book of wisdom. It's a book of ethics. So every generation can take from it something different. Let me give you some examples. My grandfather, Gregorio Contreras, he was a lawyer and then he became a judge. In a time where politics in Mexico were the most corrupt ever. A period where any public servant that did not become a billionaire was stupid. Sadly, we seem to be moving in that direction. Uh, and so the, the, the abuse of power, the cynical profiteering was just awful. And my grandfather was surrounded by this world. Some of his as people that had clerked for him now were in power. And my grandfather refused to enter into the circus of corruption of Mexico, knowing full well that he was going to be poor, that he was not going to. And I think that what kind of sustained him was the ethical example of Don Quixote. The idea that your decency, your ethic means something, that it is important, and that it is more important than to be a stupid millionaire. If you're corrupt, who cares about you? Thief. Right? So for my grandfather, it was an ethical reading. Now, for my mother, it was something completely different. Because Don Quixote, it's not an accident that it was George Washington's favorite book. It's also, many people think that Don Quixote is an idealist. He's not an idealist. An idealist knows that his ideas will never happen. That's why he's idealist. There's a big difference between an idealist and a visionary. When George Washington saw this wilderness, he saw a great country where others only saw wilderness. But he was determined to make that happen. He was determined to defeat the Brits. This was not an ideal. He was going to make it. It was going to happen. So my mother, a choreographer, had worked in New York with Balanchine precisely. That's why I know all the gossip. Comes to Mexico. She gets a grant that was money left over from a football team they wanted to do in the university. And she got into this dilapidated theater, and they raised a curtain, and it had holes in it. I said, why does it have holes? Oh, it's because we never used it, so some of the guys decided to make some jackets with it. Anybody would be no audience, no money, no glamour. Who the hell was going to go to that theater? And yet, she had this vision that she was going to create a great company, and by God, she did. 45 years later, miracle of this. So, for her, of course, the ethical part, but for her, it was the visionary part. For me, it was a process of self-invention, because honestly, I was not doing that badly. I had been a diplomat. I had worked in Washington. I had worked in LA. I had been a director of a museum 9 years. The logical thing would have been for me to move on to another museum and then another, and maybe someday be able to direct a museum in New York, right? But I didn't like it. Because it was being so close to the art and yet so far. What mattered was the numbers. No? What mattered is your fundraising skills. How much money did you get? And then the endless politics and the boards. No. I didn't like it. And to think that that was going to be my life. I mean, we had finished building up the museum. It was pretty good. And so what I liked to do was giving lectures. But I remember Dr. Gutman telling me, but Gregorio, you're going to starve. But I had a little savings and said, that's what I want to do. And I don't want to give them in a university because I don't want to have some stupid dean that tells me what I can and cannot do. I want to be able to lecture on whatever the hell I want. And so in a Don Quixote move, I decided to throw the dice and give lectures, and some were on Don Quixote, others on Frida Kahlo, others on belly buttons, or mariachi music, right? So this is just an example of three generations that have been very much inspired and transformed by Don Quixote. Because Don Quixote is everywhere in the Spanish speaking world. It's become part of the landscape, not just because of the sculptures and the paintings, but people, we did a trip to Spain to trace the places of Don Quixote. And after a while, people assumed that this house was where he lived, and it's a fiction. But he's become an over-present reality. Now, let me talk a little bit about Cervantes, which is the author. Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra is the author of Don Quixote. He was born in this humble house. His father, his date of birth is 1547, probably the 29th of September in the city of Alcalá de Henares. His father, Rodrigo, was partially deaf, and he was a surgeon. And nowadays, to be a surgeon is a prestigious position, and then it was not. What you needed was a knife, a bottle of a bottle of alcohol for your victims, and a basic knowledge of anatomy, and away you went. Cervantes very early showed talent in writing, but he wants to be a soldier. And he participates in the defining battle of European history. It was the Battle of Lepanto, where the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims, were on the verge of taking over Europe completely. So you have, on the one side, the Christian League that was formed by Venice, the Italians, the Spaniards, and then on the other hand, under General Soliman, the Ottoman troops, more than 200 ships in each camp. The Christian camp was led by John of Austria, the brother of Philip II. And the battle was just terrible. Hundreds of thousands died. There were so many casualties that at some point eyewitnesses recalled that the blood of the wounded and the dead gave a reddish tint to the ocean. And Cervantes had a high fever but insisted in participating. And as soon as he got on board, he got 3 bullets. Some of it remained in his body all of his life, and one of it practically destroyed his left arm. And so when the commander saw it, he said, "This man is going to die. He's developing gangrene." So they had to what they call to press the arm. So with two red hot metal, they clutched it to stop the infection. And he was so courageous that the head of the Christian army, Christianity won, by the way, and Europe was saved. But so exemplary had been Cervantes' role that John of Austria gave him warm personal letters of recommendation so that he could come back to Spain and be promoted. But unfortunately, on the way back, he was kidnapped by the Turks. And because he had these letters, they thought he was a very wealthy and rich man. And so they demanded an enormous ransom that his family could not pay. The sisters put their dowries to do this, and they never married. Finally, there's the possibility of liberating. He was with his brother, and he let his brother go. And so then he tried to escape 4 times. And 4 times he was captured and tortured, but he never revealed the names of his accomplices. So finally, after years, he was able to be freed, especially by the intervention of monks. There was a whole order of monks that exchanged themselves for prisoners and raised money, and wonderful job. So he came back. He came back to Spain, and he thought that he was going to be received as a hero because he participated in the Battle of Lepanto, and he had been wounded, and then he had been in prison, and he had been honorable and all this. But by then, nobody cared about Lepanto. Nobody received him. Nobody saw him. He couldn't find any job, any promotion, nothing. And he tried his hand at theater, but failed. And finally, he gets a job in one of these impossible missions of the Spanish crown. You know, with Charles V, especially with Felipe II, Spain became like the defensor of Catholicism all over the world. And all the money that came from its colonies in America was not used to the betterment of Spain or its people. It was used in this absurd wars against Protestants in Europe. And so Philip II wanted to bring a huge armada with which he thought he would defeat the British. And so he had men like Cervantes collect funds and supplies for the armada. But the Spanish government paid very little for the crops, was very bureaucratic, and so people did not want to contribute. And then Cervantes committed the terrible mistake of trying to charge taxes to the church. Imagine that. Well, it was he who went to jail, right? Because, of course, you know, the Spanish society taxes were for suckers, right? If you were well connected or you didn't do. And so Cervantes was put in a prison for doing his job. And in Sevilla, we went to the city where this happened, in La Mesilla de Alba, and there was in one of the families of Sevilla a mad knight. And so in jail, Cervantes takes this character of a mad knight and develops it. And he thinks of it as a satire of chivalry books. And finally, he's liberated from prison, and the first edition of Don Quixote appears when he is 57 years old, then a very old age. Now, Don Quixote was supposed to make fun of chivalry books. Chivalry books were the equivalent of the superhero movies today, right? And most of the characters had superpowers. They confronted dragons and beasts, had magical powers. And there was always a romantic element. They were always in love with some distant lady, and they wrote poems, and they went to see her. And then the third element of the chivalry books was magic. They were wizards and all these supernatural events. So these are the elements that Cervantes puts together in what he thought would be a fun take on chivalry. But he begins to change things almost immediately. The first important transformation is that in most chivalry books, you have the main lord, and he is the main lord. And his, associates are always in a much inferior position. But in Don Quixote, the place of Sancho Panza is as important as Don Quixote. And they represent Spanish society, because in an aristocratic society, the firstborn inherited everything. But all the other brothers inherited nothing but the name. So you had a bunch of people that were aristocratic, but were dead poor, and were all looking for some opportunity, but didn't want to work. Right? They were the hidalgos. And the other were the picaros, the peasants, the workers, the ones trying to find a living. Those two characters are the ones that do everything in Spain. Right? And so they are represented in Don Quixote. Don Quixote is, the wise man that has all this knowledge of classical culture. He's well-read. And Sancho is the sly, astute guy that has all the popular culture, the proverbs. So everything, you see it through these two different lenses, which makes it so much more interesting. And it is these two people that do all the conquest of the world. The Spanish Empire, under Charles V, was the largest empire that has existed on earth. Literally, the sun never set on all of Charles V's empire. So, this constant search for adventure made people read chivalry in Spain very differently than in England or in Poland or in France. Because Spain, everything was happening. They had just expelled the Moors that had been dominating Spain for 700 years. They had expelled the Moors, and then they had gone and found a new continent that they now colonized, where everything happened. So the chivalry books were not seen as fantasy, but as something that could be done. And these books were read by a lot of these people. And they were exactly like Don Quixote and Sancho. The heads of the ships were the hidalgos. And the sailors and the soldiers were the people. But just imagine the kind of charisma these men need. Imagine Christopher Columbus in a world where people thought that this was going to happen, that the world was flat, and that if you navigated in a certain distance, you would fall and die. Imagine the kind of power you need to have to convince people to join you in that ship when that's what you think is going to happen. Some power, no? Or Magellan, that did a journey all around the earth so long that the ships were decaying in the middle of it all. Or Albuquerque, who tried to take over Mecca with 10 men. So this whole fantastic vision. So look at Hernan Cortés. Hernan Cortés comes to what is now Mexico. He has 500 soldiers. As soon as he finds out that the Aztecs have 100,000 warriors, you know what he does? He burns his ships. As telling them, here we triumph or we die. It doesn't matter that we're 500 and they're 100,000. That's the mentality. And this mentality continues. Interestingly, George Washington was very much part of this. All of the founding fathers, but especially George Washington. I mean, now that we are 250 years, people don't think of this, but what on earth was Washington thinking? I mean, he was going to confront the richest, most powerful army in the world with a bunch of volunteers, half-armed, barely clothed, without a navy. The U.S. had no navy. Again, so the Brits had all the cards. They had an army that was disciplined, that had won everywhere, and they had a way of moving the damn British army everywhere. Washington had nothing. Nothing. And yet, here he is. And then the Brits tried to attack Boston and tried to threaten. The same as is going now. They send their ships to threaten. You don't threaten George Washington. So here they come with their stupid ships, right? And they put them all in Boston, thinking that the Americans are going to be terrified. You know what Washington does? He sees a big hill. And he says, you son of a bitches, you're going to see what's coming to you. And he's able to convince his men to move cannons up a hill in the snow, some of them without shoes. They left blood tracks in the snow. Can you imagine the force of telling people? And so they put all the cannons on top, pointing at the Brits. You know what happened? They fled. Yet all the cannons pointed right at them. And then the war starts very badly for us. Defeats in New York that are terrible. And Washington understands that he has to keep moving and moving and moving while he gives time for Benjamin Franklin to negotiate with the French and bring another navy. And then send the British to hell. All the time risking their lives, because had they gotten a hold of the founding fathers, they would have done to them the same that they did to the Irish. They would have killed them or hanged them as traitors. So you see all this, and people say, well, why do you fight Washington? And he looks at all this wilderness. We're going to build a great country here, where everybody only saw wilderness. So, the same is true of Simón Bolívar. Simon Bolivar defeats the Spaniards in South America, liberates more than 7 countries, and convinces troops that come from Venezuela, from the swamplands, to cross the Andes practically naked. And he tells them, you're going to have the heat of heroism with that speech, with that energy. And he even compares himself with Don Quixote. He says, he puts the Christ, Don Quixote, and me. Or Che Guevara. Che Guevara, with 14 men in Bolivia, confronting the entire Bolivian army and the Americans and the Green Berets. And he was this close of crossing the Andes too. So you see, this heroic feeling, this idea that you can do everything, is later codified in literature by authors like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that in 100 Years of Solitude, recreate all this, what they call magical realism. This idea of fantasy, the idea that faith is powerful, that if you believe in something strong enough, you can make it happen. That is so important, and that we so much miss. So the trigger for Don Quixote is reading. He reads and he reads and he says it, read. You will see how books drive away melancholy and improve your temper. By reading, I have become valiant, courteous, liberal, well-bred, generous, polite, bold, gentle, and patient. Try it. And so he keeps reading and reading all these books, and so he decides that he's going to be a knight. And, the first thing he needs is to change his name. He's called Alonso Quijano. And he says, no, I'm going to be Don Quixote de La Mancha. But La Mancha was nothing. It's like I'm saying I'm the Lord of Orange County. With all due respect. The Lord of Tarzana. La Mancha was a forgotten region in Spain. But he becomes Don Quixote de La Mancha. And then he needs armor. He doesn't have any, but there are some in the basement of his house. There's some armors of his grandparents. He cleans them up, tries them. Some of them start falling, and he just decides, first he tries them, he says, I won't try them anymore. Better face. And so he has his armor. Then he needs a horse, right? And so all the knights have these wonderful horses, but he has this kind of old hag. So what does he do? He changes his name. He calls him Rocinante. Still the same old hag, but now he's called Rocinante. Right? And then he needs a lady. He has no lady, but he's seen this beautiful peasant girl, that is called Aldonza Lorenzo. In the Man of La Mancha, they put Dulcinea as a prostitute. She's not a prostitute. She's just this beautiful girl that he idolizes, right? So let me show you a scene of the Russian Don Quixote, where you see his love, Dulcinea del Toboso. I'm sorry, it's Russian without subtitles. But it doesn't matter. So now, he has his armor, he has his horse, he's got his lady, he's got his name, and he's ready to go. And he goes out of the back door. Most of the knights came out from the main door. He goes from the back. And he looks at this inn that he thinks is this great palace. And so he goes in there, in the inn, and at the entrance there's two prostitutes. But he treats them as lady, as princesses. And he finds out the first example of his idea that when these ladies were treated as ladies, they reacted like such. No? They try to feed him, that they really can't get his helmet off. So the humor of the Quixote, here he is they try to put him on through a pipe. And then it occurs to him that he's not been knighted yet. So he looks at the owner of the inn, he says, "Would you mind knighting me?" And of course, when you knight somebody, well, you have to wait, time, you put your arms. And so he goes out there where there's the water where all the donkeys drink, and he gets into all kinds of fights. And so finally the owner starts getting nervous and says, "All right, let's get done with this." And so he knights him. And he tells him, make sure you always have clean shirts. And so out he goes, knighted now. But you see how efficiently he's able to do this. Faith is more important than, imagine if he were to get a real castle, a real prince, convince him, no, you make your stuff, you make your thing. Through your will, through your faith. So, the first adventure of Don Quixote is he sees a man beating his servant boy. And so he stops it. And after he leaves, the master continues beating the boy. So you could say that it was a failure. But what happens is that it is a different type of adventure. Because he has a social awareness. Now, while he's out, the barber and the priest look at all his chivalry books and decide to burn them. Right? And so they burn these books. And so here you see another act of genius of Cervantes. In those days, Spain was in the grip of the Inquisition, and you could not criticize the Inquisition. But since he built this world of this crazy knight that reads books on chivalry, he could denounce the burning of books. And people could understand that his criticism went beyond the book, right? But they couldn't do anything about it because who cares? That's and all through this early part, he gets constantly beaten, but his faith sustains him through all they return him to his home, and there he decides to invite his neighbor. His neighbor is Sancho Panza. He's this man that's very poor, and he promises that he's going to make him the governor of an island. And so he comes out now with Sancho. And in the second expedition begins with what is perhaps the most famous passage of literature. which is the fighting the windmills. Now, they come across these windmills, and Sancho says they're windmills, and Don Quixote says, no, they're not windmills, they're giants. And I'm going to fight the giants. Why is this passage so interesting? Because every time that somebody tries to oppose a system, they tell him, look, it's impossible. Like when those people were fighting Wall Street, or now those heroic guys in Minneapolis using whistles against these people that are attacking them, or people that are trying to confront something that it seems impossible. Because it's a system, it's a mechanism, it's hopeless. So Don Quixote goes after them, and of course, what happens is that he gets caught up. But then Don Quixote says, they were giants, but my enemies, the evil wizards, transformed them in mills to steal my glory. And now we're going to see this scene in the English Don Quixote. Fabulous with Lyco and Hoskins. And then, there is a scene in which he's fighting with a Basque. And now Cervantes introduces a complete novelty because he writes there, he says, I have to stop because I was taking all this story from the manuscript of this Arab historian, and that's all I've got. You know? So suddenly it gets you into this idea that it's all very realistic and he's taking it from manuscripts, you know? The story then resumes and he continues to get beaten. And in every time, he combines the social, the satirical, and the humor. He goes into this inn, and then there he finds this woman called Maritornes, that is this peasant girl, but that Don Quixote thinks is a princess that is coming to him. But he says, I'm sorry, but my heart is with Dulcinea. And so this woman is fighting him, and then comes the woman's boyfriend and beats Don Quixote. And then Don Quixote had prepared a medicine after the beatings he received that produces nausea. And so then Sancho is vomiting, he's vomiting, they're hitting him, and finally he leaves, and the owners of the inn capture Sancho and put him in this sheet. There's also a moment where he sees these giant herds of sheep, and he imagines that they're going to battle. And he puts the name of every one of them, and then he attacks the sheep. And of course, the owners of the sheep stone him, and then he loses a tooth. And here he says a pearl of wisdom. I give this one to you. He says, a tooth is worth more than a diamond. So if you ever have a problem with a tooth, fix it. Because it's worth more than a diamond. It's true. More than a diamond, a tooth. Also, if you notice, Don Quixote wears this golden hat that has like a hole, because it's what barbers used in those days to shave people. So the hole goes into your neck. But he sees it from afar. He says it's the helmet of Mambrino, and he wears it and makes it part of his costume. And again, in this possibility of criticizing society, he sees that there is these prisoners of the king. And he says, why are they prisoners? And he says, well, you know, this one owes money and he could not pay. This other one stole. And he realizes that they're all prisoners because they're poor, because they're disadvantaged. And he says, how can the king enslave these people and send them to the gallows? And so then he orders the liberation of the prisoners. And sadly, this is what happens. So that's quite common. No? He goes, he liberates them, and then he says, I would like you to go and tell Dulcinea what I just did, and they stone him. But now Sancho tells him we have to flee because the royal soldiers are going to capture us. So they go to this place called the Sierra Morena. And in the Sierra Morena, they meet this man called Cardenio. Cardenio was in love with this girl, but an aristocrat had sent him out of town, and in his absence, asked her parents to marry his girlfriend to him, Lucinda. And so now he was in the Sierra Morena. And meanwhile, Don Quixote does penance. He had read of how the knights, you know, in love of their ladies, do these acts of crazy extravagance. And so he tells Sancho to deliver a letter to Dulcinea, but Sancho forgets the letter. And then the priest and the barber are trying to bring Don Quixote back. And they look at this young man, but then when he washes his legs, they see that he is a beautiful woman. So this was the girlfriend of the aristocrat that had escaped dressed as a man. And so the priest and the barber tell her, why, we need to bring Don Quixote out of the Sierra Morena. Could you pretend to be a princess and ask him to defend you? And so the girl plays along, and she goes to Don Quixote, and Don Quixote accepts to go and free her. And then when he's in the inn, he goes to the cellar and he looks at all these big, how do you say, wine containers of leather. And he assumes that those are the giants that are the enemies of the princess. And he crushes them, and all the wine spills out there. Now, pay attention here because this is one of the most interesting literary coups of literature. So notice, there is one couple that is Cardenio and Lucinda. The other is Fernando the Duke and Dorotea. Now, he brings in the captive, which is based on his own story. And there is now a series in Prime or Netflix about it. And so it's this prisoner and this beautiful Arabian girl that escapes with him. And so they arrive. And so all this is happening. And then humor, the Maritornes reappears. And she's in a window. And she tells Don Quixote, let me see your strong hand. I want to kiss it. And so Don Quixote sticks his hand for this girl to kiss. And she ties it and leaves him there hanging in the window. And then the barber that Don Quixote had taken his thing to shave comes there and says, I want it back. Right? And then the soldiers come to arrest Don Quixote. And of course, Don Quixote sends him to hell. And it's this kind of mess. But the Duke fixes it all with money. Right? He decides to go back to Dorotea and let Lucinda and Cardenio marry. The priest convinces the royal soldiers to leave Don Quixote since he's mad. And then they convince everybody to play that they were enchanted and put Don Quixote in a magic cage so they can send him back home. And now you're going to see perhaps the greatest rendition of Don Quixote. This is taken from Orson Welles' incompleted movie of Don Quixote in a cage.
No desires gave him a good godly answer. Oh, my master, listen to me, I have come to get out of here. Such a life is never an escape from this dark dungeon. Never. I just feel like I can't get time and lots of things to see. I don't know that great big sea. I've seen the fantastic arrays of mountains and mansions. There's nothing to do with the sun over here.
And so he arrives, and he decides to go back they bring him back home, but his idea of being a knight continues. But now, it is the return to reality that we see in the second half. And there's this new character, Sansón Carrasco, that would become his main rival. And he comes out in his third expedition, and now the novelty is that this is the second book of Don Quixote. So in the novel, they talk about how everybody else has read the first part. So it's the first time that they become media creatures, where everybody knows them because they have read about them. And how does that transform the characters? So they try to see Dulcinea, and Sancho pretends that this lady is Dulcinea, and again, they attribute that she's not what Don Quixote expected by the idea that she is being bewitched. There are so many interesting ideas of how in theater, for example, people play many parts, and then when the play is over, they all go back to the same. Or in chess, when you're playing chess, The form of the horse or the knight is very important, but when the game is over, the chess figures become again just pieces of wood. And so now, Sansón Carrasco challenges him in a real duel. And the idea is that who wins will be obeying the other. So Sancho is very afraid of this knight. And so he asks Don Quixote if he can get him up on top of a tree. So the two knights are about to clash, but Don Quixote moves a little bit to get Sancho up the tree, and his rival loses the momentum. Let us see. You see, now he's really won. He is a victor. And so all the adventures now start to change. They start to become real. He has an adventure with a lion that really does not want to get out of his cage. And so, you know, at every moment, it becomes more and more realistic. There is a part of an enchanted ship where he can't save Sancho. And then when everything seems to go down, they see the dukes. And Don Quixote says, go and ask the duke. And the Duchess has read about Don Quixote. And so she brings him to the castle. And they give them a real banquet. And now, because the dukes have money, they can create all kinds of adventures. They can create like fantasies of flight, like in Clavileño, the magical horse. And they can make Sancho a governor of an island. Unfortunately, we have little time, so I'm not going to be able to go as deeply as I would like. But when Sancho is about to govern his island, and if you give me your emails, I can send you all these. They're the best piece of political advice. All of these, you know, I give me your emails and I'll send you the presentation, because it is not just about governing. For example, try to discover the truth behind the rich man's promises and gifts, as well as behind the poor man's tears. Or then, even an advice on yourself, how to govern yourself. For example, be clean and cut your nails. Don't eat garlic and onions, for their smell will reveal you. Do not go unbelted and loose, for disorderly clothes are the indication of a careless mind. We do a lot of that here. I'll send you all of the promises, all the advice of Don Quixote, just make sure you give me, but put your emails clearly and your names, and I will send you all the advices. And then Sancho governs, and eventually he falls because the dukes were playing with them, right? And Don Quixote leaves too. And after they're both out of the duke's power, Don Quixote gives us the most beautiful defense of freedom in literature. He says, liberty is the most precious gift heaven has bestowed upon us. No treasures can be compared to it. For liberty, you can and you should risk your life. And then he talks about liberty, not just in a macro sense, but also the ties. He says, you have witnessed the abundance we have enjoyed in this castle. Yet in the midst of these banquets, I seem to be confined to hunger, since I did not enjoy them with liberty as if they had been my own. Obligations to return favors are bonds that curb a free spirit. Happy is he who can enjoy his own bread without the obligation of having to thank anyone for it. I'll send you all of these advices and maxims. Finally, they come to Barcelona. And in Barcelona, Don Quixote gets a chance to see the ocean. They speak with a talking head. He participates in a dance. He watches the printing of books. And he's challenged again by Sansón Carrasco, the same man that is now calls himself the Knight of the Half Moon. And this is what happens. And so Don Quixote is defeated, and he had accepted to return to his home. And the process of returning to reason is extraordinarily painful. Now, suddenly he starts realizing that he's not a knight. And as he loses his madness, he loses his strength. It gets to the point where he cannot even carry his own armor. There is a moment where he dreams of being a shepherd, but pretty soon he arrives home and writes his will. And in the last moment, Sancho says, "You cannot let yourself die." But Don Quixote says, "I'm no longer Don Quixote. You know, I'm just Alonso Quijano." And in his epitaph, they write, "Here lies Don Quixote, and death did not triumph over his life." Thank you very much. And now I want to do something for all of you. I would like to turn all the lights on. Oh, everything. And now, this is a sword I bought in Toledo with authentic Spanish steel. And so with this sword, I want to knight you all. so you can pursue your dreams, and may you never lose your madness. Thank you very much. So if anybody has a question.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Oh,